In this video, I will look at blenders and erasers. Both are very important tools in watercolor painting. Photoshop CS6 introduced a new blender, the mixer brush. But I do not use it at all for blending, as it's very complicated and hard to get to work well. It's really more suitable for giving photographs a painterly effect than for watercolor blending, in my at least current opinion. So all of the blending is currently done using the Smudge Tool. This works very well. Also, it has the big advantage over the mixer brush of being backwards compatible with previous versions of Photoshop. The Smudge Tool is like a paintbrush, but instead of putting down paint, it moves the paint around. It makes use of the brushes to do this, so that when we pick the Smudge Tool, we also need to pick a brush. And although all of them will smudge, some are better than others. Of the new brushes introduced in CS6, the pencil brushes are not great for blending. Again, the bristle brushes introduced in CS5 are also not very good for blending. That leaves the airbrush or scattergun, and this does make a good blender, but it's quite possible to use other brushes to produce quite as good an effect. So from a blending point of view, versions of Photoshop pre-CS6 are just fine. In fact, this is true of all of the tools. If you have Photoshop CS6, then that's great. But if not, you can paint very well with the version you have. I'm developing these tools for my own use, and I use Photoshop CS6 largely because it has very significant improvements for photography. But I will release pre-CS6 versions if there is interest. Let's look at the basics of how the Smudge Tool works. For this, we pick the Smudge Tool, obviously, and a simple brush, the soft round brush. With the tool set like this, mode normal, strength 100%, sample or layer, finger painting, and shape dynamics all turned off, this is what the Smudge Tool does. As you can see, it may have some uses, but not for watercolors. Now let's turn the strength down to 50% over here. To do this quickly, we can just hit the 5 key. So 0 for 100%, 8 for 80%, 5 for 50%. Well, we are now getting some blending, but still quite a lot of dragging of the paint, which is in fact a very useful feature, as we will see later. Well, let's try the strength at 10%. Well, it's a bit harder to see, but we're still getting more dragging than blending. Now let's put the strength back to 50% and turn scattering on. Hello? This looks more like it. Well, scattering is essentially the key to blending with the Smudge Tool. Varying the amount of scattering and the count, and also whether both axes are on or off, gives us a lot of control over the blending. If we now turn transfer on, we can control the amount of blending very precisely, because the pen pressure then controls the strength. So with a very light touch, you get this kind of blending, and then with a stronger touch, more pressure on the stylus, we get a lot more blending. For finer control, we can also turn on shape dynamics because that controls the size of the brush. So you can see that even a basic brush like the soft round brush can be excellent for blending. Further blending effects can be obtained by using other brushes, and for this the airbrush or scattergun in CS6 is very good, but as I said, by no means essential. The various blenders here just give different blend effects. So let's just try a few. This is kind of the basic Smudge Tool, does this kind of blending. The Smudge Blender is a much softer, bigger brush. You can make it smaller of course, but it gives this kind of soft effect. The Smudge Blender Scattered is a little bit similar, but a bit softer, I think, perhaps. A bit more scattering there maybe. The Smudge Bristle gives a bit of a bristly effect, if you see that. The Smudge Delicate is a very useful brush. Make it a little bit bigger so you can see its effect more clearly, but you can see that there's a lovely blending that it does. The Smudge drags, as the name would imply. Smudge Drippy Water is very nice because it's like adding water in a kind of a drippy sort of way. Smudge Drag Soft and Soft Round would be a bit like the drag, Smudge Drag, but round. The Smudge Fade fades away, so it starts off and then fades off. Quite nice too. The Smudge Wet Diffuser is a bit like the Smudgy Water but softer, and that's the lot for now. Another useful thing to do is to pick a blender like the Smudge Wet Diffuser to erase some paint. So we pick an eraser, erase a little bit of paint, and then to smudge. A bit more erasing, a bit more smudging. This gives the effect of removing paint, perhaps by using a cloth or a dry brush, and then adding water. Let's now have a look at the erasers. Like the blenders, the eraser tool uses a brush to do the erasing. Any brush can be used as an eraser, which potentially makes the eraser a very powerful tool. Erasing is more straightforward than blending, at least in principle. However, apart from the obvious hard eraser that just gets rid of all the paint, and which is very useful for that very reason, lots of effects from scratching to dry brush to adding water are possible with erasers. So let's look at a few. Well, the basic eraser pencil hard simply erases like this. The eraser soft, round, as this, and the eraser soft is similar but just softer. The eraser dry clean edge gives this sort of effect. If I make it bigger, you can see it better. So it's almost like a dry brush, that a dry brush has been applied. The eraser scatter gives this sort of effect. I'm going to zoom out a bit. which is almost like adding water, as you can see. The eraser scatter clean edge is quite similar, except you've got a clean edge like this. And the eraser texture, I'll have to make it bigger for you to see, gives this sort of effect again, as though maybe a dry brush has been applied. Again, as with the Smudge Tool, scattering is key to achieving a lot of these effects. You can change it from something looking a bit like a dry brush to maybe added salt. Now the eraser has the added advantage of a texture control and also a dual brush control, both of which are missing from the Smudge Tool, unfortunately, and I very much hope that Adobe will at least add the dual brush control to the Smudge Tool in the next release of Photoshop. With all of these controls, and when used in conjunction with the blenders, the erasers become powerful tools for watercolor painting. In the next video, I will do a demo painting to start to bring all of this together. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for watching.